Hamza had always believed that broken things were not truly dead. They were just waiting for someone patient enough to understand them. And this belief was what brought him again and again to the far edge of Karachi's old airport, where a rusted airplane named Falcon 17 stood. Abandoned like a forgotten memory, its wings covered in dust, its windows cracked, and its engine silent for years. Well, people passed by without even noticing it, but for Hamza it was different, because every time he looked at it he imagined it flying again in the sky, cutting through clouds like it once must have done. And one evening, as the orange sunset reflected on the plane's worn metal body, he placed his hand on it and quietly promised that he would bring it back to life no matter how impossible it seemed, even though everyone else thought he was just dreaming, including the airport manager, who laughed when Hamza asked for permission to work on the plane, telling him that even experienced engineers had failed and that the aircraft was nothing more than scrap. But Hamza did not argue, because deep inside he knew that restoration was not just about tools and parts, it was about belief. So the next day he returned with his friend Ollie, who was skilled with electronics and always curious about how things worked. And together they stepped inside the plane, where just filled the air and silence echoed through the empty cabin, making it feel like they had entered a forgotten world frozen in time. Yet instead of fear they felt excitement, because this was the beginning of something extraordinary. And they started with the simplest task of cleaning, removing layers of dirt, broken pieces, and bird nests that had taken over the interior, slowly revealing the structure beneath. And as days turned into weeks, they began examining the aircraft piece by piece, Hamza focusing on the mechanical systems like engines, fuel lines, and landing gear, while Ollie worked on the tangled wires and damaged control panels, trying to understand what could still be saved and what needed to be rebuilt from scratch. And progress was painfully slow, often frustrating, because every small success was followed by multiple failures. And there were nights when they returned home, exhausted and doubtful, wondering if the manager had been right all along. Yet something kept pulling them back. Perhaps it was the idea that they were not just fixing a machine, but reviving a story that had been left unfinished. And one day, after weeks of effort, a tiny light flickered on the control panel for a brief second before fading again. But that single moment changed everything, because it proved that the plane was not entirely dead. It still had a heartbeat hidden somewhere within its broken systems. And from that point onward, their determination grew stronger, leading them to search for rare parts in scrap markets, old warehouses, and junkyards across the city, sometimes finding pieces that almost fit and modifying them to work, sometimes returning empty-handed but never giving up. And along the way, Hamza learned skills he had never imagined, from welding metal to understanding engine compression, while Ollie experimented with modern electronics to replace outdated systems, blending old technology with new ideas, creating something unique. And months passed like this until one evening when Hamza discovered a hidden compartment near the rear of the plane, something that did not match the original design. And inside it he found an old logbook covered in dust, its pages yellowed with age. And as he carefully opened it, he realized it belonged to the last pilot who had flown Falcon 17. And the final entry described an emergency landing caused by engine failure, but also mentioned that the aircraft was still capable of flying again if properly repaired, which sent a wave of excitement through Hamza, because it confirmed what he had believed from the beginning, that the plane was not beyond saving. And when he showed it to Ollie, they both felt as if the pilot from the past was speaking directly to them, encouraging them to continue. And from that day, their work took on a new meaning, as if they were not just restoring metal but honoring a legacy. And even Hamza's father, who had initially been skeptical, started helping them by sharing his mechanical expertise and guiding them through complex repairs, turning the project into something bigger than just a friends chasing a dream. And gradually the plane began to transform, its engines cleaned and partially rebuilt, its wiring reorganized, its cockpit restored to a functional state. And though it was far from perfect, it was no longer a lifeless structure. It was becoming an aircraft again. And then came the moment they had been waiting for, the day they attempted to start the engine for the first time, with nervous excitement filling the air. as Hamza sat in the cockpit and Ollie stood outside monitoring the systems. And when he turned the ignition, there was silence for a second that felt like forever, followed by a rough coughing sound as the engine struggled to respond. And then suddenly it roared to life, loud and powerful, sending vibrations through the entire plane and echoing across the empty part of the airport. And in that moment, Hamza felt tears in his eyes, because it was no longer just a dream. It was real. They had brought Falcon 17 back from the dead. And even the airport staff gathered around in disbelief, including the manager who had once laughed at them, now standing speechless as he watched the engine running, realizing that determination and belief had achieved what logic had dismissed as impossible. And although the plane was not yet ready for flight, it had already proven something far greater. That restoration is not just about fixing what is broken, but about seeing potential where others see failure. And in the days that followed, they continued working with even greater passion, fine-tuning every detail, preparing for the day when Falcon 17 would finally leave the ground again, carrying with it not just toys and a restored machine, but a story of hope, persistence, and the power of believing in something that everyone else had given up on. A story that would remind anyone who heard it that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with a simple decision to not walk away from what seems impossible.